you see my presentation?
I see
The vision for South Hill. It's about to come up. Hello, my name's Nathan Norris, and I am going to give a presentation this evening that sort of gives you an update and overview of how our team is going to be spending the next several days helping define a potential vision for South Hill area. I'm going to go ahead and share this presentation. The first thing that I want to talk about is the process we're going through. Process is one in which not everything is going to be decided in a few days while we're here. We are simply another step in the continuation of the effort by the town to go ahead and help make it easy for landowners to move forward with a vision that's consistent with the comprehensive plan that was developed in 2014 and with the new neighborhood code that was adopted last year. So I'm going to try to take us through this presentation so that you have a better understanding of what to expect as we move forward. As it relates to the process, we're going to go ahead and come up with an actual design that we want to share with everyone on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. using the same format. And what we've done is for the last 2 days, we've toured the area and we've gone ahead and walked the site. We've heard from some people already. We've interviewed various stakeholders. We will continue to be moving forward with that process tomorrow as well as on Wednesday before we show you some different concepts that we think are going to fully leverage the opportunities. We are outsiders. We come from different places across North America. And what we have been really impressed with is what a special opportunity that this presents. It's a very uncommon confluence of special elements that make us very excited about the potential for this. As I said before, we're following up on the 2014 comprehensive plan that set out this vision to build something special on South Hill. As you know, the town adopted the new neighborhood code just last year, which is the operational rules that allow the types of things that are set out in the comprehensive plan to be built and developed. I'll be going through in detail some of those elements. Essentially, the way that we describe it is it authorizes the development of traditional neighborhood developments. So we'll go in more detail. But the special opportunity begins with looking at the bigger picture. You know, I've learned about the three hills, West Hill, East Hill, and South Hill. And this South Hill opportunity is particularly special because it's one of the three hills, number one. Number two, it's got incredibly close proximity to the city of Ithaca, and which is the heart of the region. It's essentially adjacent to Buttermilk Falls State Park, which is great, as well as Ithaca College, as well as Ithaca College's natural lands. So it's also adjacent to the South Hill Business Campus. So it's really ideally situated in this area. So it's important that we get this right. It's also not only well sited, it actually includes some rather beautiful property. We walked this property this morning. This is an image from that walk. It was a gorgeous day. And so this is a very special piece of property that deserves special design, special opportunity. It's also at a crossroads. You know, here we see the key intersection on South Hill and how essentially unremarkable it is right now. We believe that this area deserves something more special to be developed over the long haul. And that's what we're going to set out, is try to show everybody what the opportunities are for the development over the long haul. The other thing that I think is important that makes this special for us is the ability to work not only with a town that has spent literally almost a decade trying to build essentially a shared vision for how this development will be developed, but also we have the cooperation of the landowners. We're working with them right now, listening to their concerns as well as their suggestions and their expertise about the land that's out there. And I think that's going to contribute to making this a big success as we move forward. So it's a very special opportunity. Now, from my perspective, I usually analyze development opportunities from the perspective of what is the ideal. And the ideal for a very long period of time has always been the ability for us, and by us I mean humans, to enjoy both town and country at the same time, essentially. Ithaca is very special in that you combined nature with the city as well as the town in abundance. This is a rare town. I view it as an international town where people from all over the globe are coming together for the educational opportunities here, and they come and they are greeted with a place that not only provides the town element, but also this access to nature. We see everybody enjoy, biking. They want to kayak, they want to canoe, they want to get out on the lake, they want to enjoy the hiking opportunities. There's really so much to do, and you've got streams running through the area. You've got the gorges. So that is an ideal that attracts people greatly. Our challenge is that historically we haven't had the rules that would allow it to be easy to create a town, village, or city over the last 50 years. In fact, our transportation design standards generally make it almost impossible to build these what I would call walkable streets. We'll talk about that in a moment. As we think about nature and we think about town, it's important from my perspective, this is just a personal view, not the view of the town, that if you're going to take nature away, we need to compensate everybody with a really beloved town. We need, in other words, if we're going to build any, from a planning perspective, what we would call urbanity, or a town or a village, we want to compensate, everyone for the loss of nature with a really awesome town, village, or ultimately city. We're just talking about essentially a village scale on the property on South Hill that we're talking about today. But that's what we really want to be able to do, is create a place that makes it even better than it is today. And all of you have visited places like that. We'll talk more about that on Wednesday. But as we look at that, we have to acknowledge that there's essentially two ways that we can develop in the United States right now. One way is what we call the drive-only conventional suburban development model. And these are what normally people refer to as suburban areas. These are the areas where, to essentially take care of whatever our daily needs may be, we go ahead and take care of them by driving. Okay, I've been instructed to mute YouTube in the browser. So I hope that takes care of it. If it doesn't, I will go ahead and get another message. So we've got this conventional suburban development model where you drive. Then we have the other model, which this is actually an image of a rather small town in the United States that is not only drive-able, it's also walk-able, it's bike-able, it's what I call dining-able. It's not a place you drive through, it's a place that you essentially try to drive to and expect to linger there. So that's that. We can see it in plan. This is actually a place that was designed in 1981. On the left is how it would have been designed according to the standard suburban model back at that time. And on the right is how it was ultimately planned and developed, which is the traditional model. On the left, what you're going to see is essentially a strip mall. You're going to see apartment complexes. You're going to see single family dwellings segregated by the size of the lot and the size of the house. You're going to see condominiums. Actually, this is on a beach, and that's what's on the beachfront. On the right, you will see that you've got everything sort of mixed together. You can't just mix these haphazardly. They have to be mixed with excellent design, and we'll talk about that later. But all I wanted to be able to show you here is that there's different elements that are important. Okay, so as we look at those elements, on the left, you see the suburban development, which has large blocks. Okay, it has streets where people can drive faster than 25, has very deep setbacks on almost everything, has no on-street parking that might shield those who are walking from oncoming traffic going around. We don't have a wide variety of building uses or types mixed together. And we don't have a wide variety of what we call civic spaces, let alone a wide variety of different street types. On the right, we have all those things. So you have a small block size. You have streets where the cars are going less than 25, and that's important for people to be able to walk, because if they're going faster than that, we know we don't want to walk next to those places because they're dangerous. We have shallow setbacks, on-street parking, a variety of building types, uses and sizes in close proximity, as well as a variety of different civic spaces. These are things we would call playgrounds, parks, greens, squares, all these different types of civic spaces that are not leftover lands, but they're the very best lands being shared by everyone in the community. So those are the key differentiating factors. Now, that's sort of boring and lousy compared to actually what type of neighborhood would a traditional neighborhood development be pursuant to the new neighborhood code that we're trying to follow as we design South Hill. And what we believe is really important is this quote by a colleague of ours, Steve Mouzon, who wrote The Original Green, about the original ways that our forefathers were essentially environmentally responsible. And he said the first rule of being environmentally responsible is essentially, if it can't be loved, it won't last. In other words, if we don't build something that's lovable, it won't be cared for in the future. And if it's not cared for in the future, it's going to have to be replaced, and it ends up being a very poor environmental decision. So what I thought might be helpful is to sort of describe some of the elements of what constitutes a lovable neighborhood. And so that may sound a little hokey to some, but it's at its core, it's what we're aspiring to do, is create a place that will be greatly loved and appreciated. Now, this is the boring chart that's going to tell you everything you need to know about designing a lovable neighborhood. We're not going to go through all this. I want to focus on what's in the center, essentially, and what's at the top. So I'm going to jump through those, and those are essentially what's the big picture, and then what are the three key neighborhood characteristics that define this lovable neighborhood. The big picture idea is this notion of the transect. And your code actually pays attention to transect. It has different categories, but the transect is a pretty basic idea. It's an idea that says we want to create lovable places by matching people's preferences to place. That is to say, if we wanted to come up with the places that humans love the most, think of humans as another animal on the planet and we want to come up with the ideal human habitat. Okay, what would that be? Well, if we ask people what their favorite places are, we can get an idea of that. And what we would learn if we ask people their favorite places, we would find that not everybody agrees on where they would want to be. But what we do find is that those differences vary from people's preferences having to do with how rural their environment is versus how urban it is. So in this slide, what you're seeing is essentially on the left is a natural zone. That would be Buttermilk Park would be a natural zone. That's where we go to be immersed in nature. And then we have rural zones that might be agricultural working lands. On the other end is our urban core. In South Hill, we're just dealing with a couple of these, what we call transect zones. And what you're going to notice is that all the details of development change as you go from one element of the habitat to the next. And what's amazing is that although we may not share our preference for the specific area on the transect where we would want to live, we all have a shared understanding of what the ideal would be. Like if we want to say what I may not want to live on a farm, but if I know the ideal farm, I think of the farm I see when I'm on South Hill, when I look over to the across the horizon, I guess it's to West Hill, and I see a beautiful farm with the red barn, the silo, the lands around it, and that I have an agreement with most everybody about that looks ideal. Just in the same way that if we come down to the city center and we want to be on a vibrant street, we know exactly what that is. So all these details change. Now, what changes? Here's something we've illustrated in the past. This shows it in essentially a 2D illustration where you can see you go from nature at the top all the way down to the city center at the bottom. And along the way, every detail changes. The nature of streets change. The nature of the building types change. The nature of fencing changes. Like you wouldn't want to put a split rail fence in the downtown. You'd want to put an ornamental iron fence there, yet on the farm, you'd probably have a wooden split rail fence. It all makes sense. So everything changes along the transect. And so that's why we're using that as a tool in the code, is to make sure that we have these, what we would call very immersive environments. We have the right street with the right building types, with the right fence types, et cetera. So it is all working as it naturally should. And this is an illustration of a plan we once did that shows the different colors represent different transect zones, as well as civic spaces in red. And it just says that we like to have a variety in close proximity. That's the big takeaway from here. So we don't want a neighborhood that's just all one thing. We want the variety. So that's why the transect is an important ordering device for us as we go through the planning process. Now, this is a little more interesting, I hope, and this is the three defining characteristics of a lovable neighborhood. The first step is to make it a walkable place. And we're going to talk about what that means. Then the next key element is variety. Some people talk about it, the diversity of the community, but it's really a variety of different things that you want in close proximity. And the third thing is to create spaces that are what we would often refer to as the spaces between the buildings. Okay, these are the outdoor rooms that provide essentially a level of charm that we love, and I'll describe that in further detail in a moment. So the first thing about walkability is that you've got to have real places to walk to. We're not talking about a path that you can simply walk through nature. We're talking about places to walk to satisfy the needs you have on a daily basis. Here, I used to run the Downtown Development Authority for Lafayette, Louisiana, and this was a map that showed where you could eat and where you could shop. And so if we didn't have places to eat or shop, we wouldn't have many reasons to walk around, for example, in the downtown. So we really want places to walk to. That's important. If you want to see the current walkability of a community, one of the easy things to do, it's not always accurate, but it's mostly accurate. You could go to walkscore.com and type in your address. My old office was at 735 Jefferson Street, and it got a walk score of 89, and that's on a scale of 0 to 100. If I simply moved about 4.5 miles away from that town center, I could go to a place that only has a walk score of 5. All right, so that's the difference between those two spaces. So our job is to create a place when we're doing a traditional neighborhood development that gets us higher up on that scale. And so that's what we're looking to do. This is an example of a place that although it has a sidewalk, it's not, and although it has places to walk to, it's not safe. Okay, it's not physically safe. You can see there's about 6 inches of grass that separates this person from a 6-lane major arterial where cars are going about 50 miles an hour. Okay, and so that is not a place where anybody's going to feel safe. There's no on-street parking to protect them, no street trees. There's no shade from the sun, no cover from the rain. There's, if it's at night, this is not well lit. You don't have people watching you who live in close proximity. So it's not safe. If it's not safe, people aren't going to walk. The next element, so we talked about you need places to walk to. you need it to be safe, but you also need to recognize that humans bore easily. And as we bore easily, that the opposite of that is entertaining them. Now, the easiest way to entertain humans is to give them what they're most interested in. And it turns out that humans are most interested in other humans. And so everything that we design when we're trying to create an urban environment is all about trying to increase the opportunity to interact with other humans. And that is as simple as just being able to see them. So you see these images on the right, the top is a building. And if I can't see into the building, I can't see humans. And if the building facade has blank walls mostly, it's not interesting to look at. And so that is essentially a good way to kill everything around it, is to put a building like that. Or down below is a parking garage that we call a naked parking garage, where all we see is the parking garage, and it's overlooking a civic space to the rear. And that's a good way to kill a street. Nobody wants to do that. So you can see the list of reasons under the boredom generators that are the things that are going to kill the entertainment. That's like not enough windows, it's blank walls, or it's we can see windows that are obscured. They're heavily tinted, so we can't see inside them, so we can't see the humans. It's the naked parking garages. It's building just with one single use, like the building on the both the upper left and the bottom right here are buildings that only have one thing in them. And so once people leave work at 5, the whole area is dead. And so that's bad. And we also see that both those buildings are suburban in character, but believe it or not, those are in the middle of a city. And so they kill the city. Long blocks is another thing that can really kill people. Whereas if we look at this storefront, this is not a remarkable storefront, except that it allows us to see in, to see what they're selling, as well as see humans inside. And that makes it interesting, and it's beautifully done. So it works really well. It actually generates value for the community, whereas the others don't. So I'm not going to get into it tonight, but we'll probably talk about it on Wednesday night. And that's the impact of modest block size on walkability is really important. If you have a very long block, it might we might be not only bored because we don't come to a corner very often, but the more important thing is the vehicles that are traveling, people driving in the cars are going to feel safer to go faster. So usually when we have speeding problems, it's usually when a street goes on for longer than it might be. If you've ever been to a city that has speed bumps and you hit the speed bump, my normal thinking is, oh, that's where the intersection should have naturally occurred. And that way the cars would have gone slow enough for me to feel comfortable to walk next to that street. So that's a very important element. So that's what we're aspired to, is to create a place where the humans are going to be essentially entertained in a safe environment where they have places where they really want to go. That's the first element. Second element is variety. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but this is essentially a variety of different building types, different uses that are going on in them, different building conditions, different sizes, different streets, okay, because we get bored if all the streets are all the same, and different civic spaces. All right, so those are, they have huge impacts upon the environment, the economy, as well as social impacts if we can provide all that. I'm not going to go into those details. We'll talk a little more about how those are integrated into our plans on Wednesday night. But suffice it to say that if we have this variety, we have created a place that is great for all ages. It's great for entrepreneurs to be able to start in places like this before they grow into something that's too big. And it just entertains us by constantly having something else for us to be entertained by, whether it's the feeling of a different street or narrow building facade widths that allow us to be entertained as we walk down a street. Now, I did want to show this because this building is really just not very exciting. It's, it's a sort of it's not a spectacular building, but this building, like many that you can find in Ithaca, is rather old. And I think it's fascinating because it's so functional in its simplicity and its size that it's capable of being many things over its life. And so it doesn't get torn down, it doesn't get ignored, it doesn't go vacant for a long time. And right now, I think it's funny because the people who built that probably would have never imagined that that building would one day in the future be used is the Old Town School for Dogs in Old Town Alexandria outside DC. But that's what it's being used for. And I think that's great because if you know its history, I'm sure you would think, oh, well, that could have been a law office. It could have been a corner store. It could have been a grocery. It could be any number of things. People could live above it. It's so flexible just because of its design. Just recently, I went back to research what was there a long time ago, and I found out, sure enough, it was essentially a corner market. And so it shows the resilience of small building types and how important that is. The final thing that I wanted to talk about is the outdoor rooms that would be created on these streets. It essentially gets to the idea that I don't know if you ever were at a holiday gathering where a young kid gets a big present, it's a big box, and they seem more interested in the box than they are in the toy or what have you. And the idea is that we love these outdoor rooms that get created between the buildings. Here you're going to see where the most valuable real estate in this in-town setting is essentially those that get to look out over the street. It's not on the backs of the buildings. It's typically on the front where they get to see through a window that gives them a view of the theater of life. So what are we really looking at? It's a little room, it's literally a room. Here is the base, which is the street or where the planning areas are. That's the floor. It's a pretty easy concept. The side walls as well as the back walls are typically formed either by trees or by buildings. Okay, and so that's how we get these views. And so right here we're seeing a terminated view at the end of this street. So that gives us a back wall. You don't always have a back wall, but you always should have a side wall at a minimum. This is a terminated view in my neighborhood, which is a traditional neighborhood development where I live. And that was just created by safeguarding a hill that the developer was ready to mow down to put different lots. And we said, no, that's the perfect civic building that can terminate the view and create an outdoor room that will make it very special. So that's the sort of design technique we'd use. This is another development in my area where it has a deflected view, which means it's not terminating it directly, it's deflecting your view. And that's another technique that can be used to create an outdoor room. Okay, and then finally, sometimes you have a ceiling, sometimes you don't. That ceiling can be created by a canopy of trees. Last month I was in Charleston, and you can see the trees actually form a canopy that create a ceiling. It almost feels like your tunnel when you're going through, and that's a really key ingredient. Or you can do it artificially. Here we have adult elves walking through the city that has simply strung lights across a block of their downtown. And that's a way to give that ceiling as well. All right. So this is an example of not an outdoor room. And so it doesn't get a premium. It doesn't become beloved like these other places that I've been showing you. All right. This is a simple thing. This is actually a development that the developer had to fight with the city for an entire year over the street design just to build something simple and basic like this. Well, I give tours of different developments across the country, and this is one where I gave the tour not too long ago, and they were filming a reality TV show, Housewives of Atlanta, right in this area on the corner because it's a place people wanted to hang out. It was essentially a place that has completely transformed everything around it because it was lovable. All right, so that's sort of the summary of that. As a sideline, I did want to mention that, I actually got in this business because I was so blown away by this unbelievable economic development initiative called Paris. From 1850 to 1870, if you don't know, it radically transformed itself into the great city that we know today. And it's paying dividends 150 years later, is really the city that most people want to go and visit. It was so loved, in fact, if you don't know the history of World War II, it was so loved that Adolf Hitler had ordered that it be burned down. And he got one of his generals who had already burned down other cities to come to Paris on August 1st of 1944 and told him, a couple of weeks later, okay, now I want you to burn it down. And he called him up the day after and said, is Paris burning? And those occupied forces, that general, he dragged his feet long enough to save Paris. The occupying force loved, even recognized how lovable Paris was and how it should be cared for, not burned to the ground. So I think that's a great testament to it. Now, I've been talking about what makes a lovable neighborhood. Our challenge in making lovable neighborhoods is that a lot of the street design standards that we have are not set up to do that, especially at the state level. We have a state road that runs through this area on South Hill. So we're going to have to work with them. But the good news is that over the past decade, there have been adoption of engineering manuals that allow new thoroughfare design standards to essentially be created in the context upon which they should be applied. In other words, we care about what's happening from a development standpoint around these streets. We're just not looking at the streets anymore for how they operate. So we're going to have to move forward with that. We also have issues about a lot of people are asking, well, what is the intensity of development that we're going to see? And they can talk about density. Now, these are two images. One on the left was rated like the one on the right on a -10 to +10 scale. Okay. The one on the left got a -5. At the time this image was rated, it was perfectly legal to build this in this town. On the right it got a +6 on that -10 to +10 scale. It was illegal to build at the time. We gave different images showing people living in apartments on the left. It got a -4. We showed another picture of apartments over some shops on the right, and it got a +7. It was illegal to build. On the left was perfectly legal. This was the basis for coming up with the type of code that we have in the new neighborhood code, which allows essentially well-designed developments to occur where the densities aren't quite as important. Because the big issue with regard to density is that when the density is poorly designed, it doesn't work. It's actually that bad. It is absolutely objectionable and people will fight against it. But if it's good, it can work. This is actually, it's actually, if it's well designed, essentially the density is camouflaged is what I would say. It's not really noticeable. All right. So good design is akin to camouflage for the built environment. Okay. This next slide is about affordability. We have issues where a lot of cities across the country are grappling with how do we make our cities more affordable. Well, the number one way is to give people housing options that essentially compensate them for being in smaller dwelling types. That is to say, like if I have a friend in Paris, they may just have an 800 square foot apartment, which I think is very nice, but they do most of the living out in the public realm. They have great parks to go to. They have great restaurants to go to. They have gyms they can go to. They can do a lot of the things that we currently try to put inside where we live on the outside. And so after World War II, we oftentimes most cities came up with rules that essentially banned what we call now the missing middle. These are the missing middle housing types that spring from the single family house essentially to the apartment complex. Those are the two ends of what we built mostly in the United States. And the in-between stuff, which we can see in our older beloved neighborhoods, are the ones that essentially we want to be able to incorporate if we can design them well to be integrated into a full-on neighborhood, traditional neighborhood. This is an example. This is actually from a place that's not too far from where I live, where they follow these rules. And this is when I give tours, people aren't really sure what this building is, but it's essentially 4 apartments, 2 on either side. One's on the upper floor, one's on the lower floor. And because of its design, it can sit on the street with single family houses, and everybody's okay with that because it's well camouflaged. It's fitting within the context of the neighborhood. So that's what makes it important. This is actually on the block where I live, and this is a 1-bedroom, 750 square foot house. There's a series of them. And this house, when it was originally built, actually sold for about $156,000. And then it's on the same block as a house that sold for essentially $1.4 million. And the way that was done was through, you can't have the big house that overlooks a lake facing, a 1-bedroom house. That doesn't really work. So it's all how they're put together, which is a design element that we'll go through once again on Wednesday, where we can integrate these and have it work. This is absolutely a delightful arrangement. I love living in this place. This is another example. This was in a college town where a developer took a downtrodden area of the the town and started building incrementally throughout, and just simple building types that were well composed, well placed, nothing fancy about them. And it's literally changed that whole town. They actually brought our team that's here in Ithaca today into that town to actually develop their code for them that would allow this to be legal. This was actually done by variance at the time, but they wanted to make sure that they made it easy for developers to do something like this. And this is a very advanced vision in a resort community that's still taking advantage of all these techniques and principles that we're going to be applying here in Ithaca. But you're going to see the nature of the streets, the nature of the sidewalks, how wide the building facades are, the different building types, a deflected view here. You see a terminated view as well. All these elements are special. This is actually a main street of a resort community that was voted by the American Institute of Architects as one of the 10 best main streets in the United States. And it's the only one that was built after World War II. So that's why I'm using it for the design principles, not necessarily for the architectural character, not at all. So we can sort of see where where we're talking about developing here, it's sort of has gaps and everything. This is not an unusual situation in a lot of towns. And so we can see an image like this and say, okay, well, if we wanted to develop this to be more loved, if we wanted people to use it more, if we wanted to be taken care of over the long haul, what would we do? Well, we could start with this and we could improve it. We could, actually, this looks unloved, this image. This is just taking care of what we've already got and making, sort of sending a signal that this is loved. If you send the signal that it's loved, people will follow. All right, so that's what we do. If we want to improve this more, what would we do? Okay, we might add more buildings across the street. We might provide a safe place to walk across, which is a crosswalk here. If we wanted to improve it even more, we could add more buildings so that we're getting more toward that outdoor rooms that we could get. People might live up above some of those shops on the right. They might have offices above that first floor. Okay, and then if we want to make it even better, we could add the street trees, and then naturally people are going to come and gravitate to this space. So if we go back through this again, it doesn't look like much right here. All we have to do is follow those design techniques that are embedded in your code, as well as hope for through your comprehensive plan vision, and we get something better. So this would be a village center that we might be wanting to aspire to create as an amenity for all the surrounding neighborhoods in South Hill. So, this could create the sort of place that I have, my company designed the neighborhood, and then they convinced me to move there, and it's been a very enjoyable place to live because I get to enjoy streets like this. And this is sort of an aerial that sort of shows you not only the block I was referring to, but our very small town center, a wide variety of housing types, nature, terminated views, different types of civic spaces, all sorts of variety that makes it a place that's very loved. It's so loved, just to give you an idea, that we've had neighbors who've had to move out of the neighborhood for changes in jobs to different areas. And the kids actually had to go through counseling because it was so difficult to leave this neighborhood that was so much fun and interesting, to go to another one that didn't have all the freedom that was built into this, didn't have the interesting places to play, et cetera. And that's really what we're trying to do, but obviously do it for the context of Ithaca. So that's that. I guess if I'm not sure if we're in a mode where we can answer questions, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if I can escape here. And I don't, can people see? I guess they can't see chat. This isn't a Zoom. If you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to us. And you can, let's see, Howard and Jeff, who are also in the studio, do you know how we're supposed to field the questions? There's a delay in this, so I don't even know how we're going to. I tell you what. I'm looking under the YouTube to see if there's any.
Okay. No, I don't see.
No, I don't see it. We've got 28 people watching. I tell you what, just contact us at the planning department. We're going to be here in the town hall all day tomorrow. We'll be here on Wednesday, and our next presentation will be at 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. So I'm going to stay here in case staff comes by and says, can you talk about this or talk about that? Because I know they're down the hall. Tell me, okay, at the bottom, oh, great. I was just handed a flyer. Okay, questions or ideas you want to share, you can call the planning department. It's 607-273-1747, or send an email to Dan at dtasman, DTASMAN @town.ithaca.ny.us. So once again, planning department, you can give us a call. It's 607-273-1747, or email us at dtasman@town.ithaca.ny.us. Thanks so much. We would really love to hear from you. Bye-bye.